Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we are going to be tackling, tackling's not quite the right word, more like exploring this crazy idea that our brains are like constantly predicting the future and like what that means for consciousness.
Yeah, it's a question that has, really, it's captivated philosophers and scientists, for as long as we've been around. But, now with the advances in both neuroscience and AI, we're finally starting to get some answers.
Yeah, and we've got these three amazing resources that are going to help guide us through this. First, we've got a new research paper about this thing called BrainLM. And basically, it's this deep learning model that is learned from, just an insane amount of brain scan data.
Yeah.
Then we're going to get into this Embodied Predictive Global Workspace framework, or EPGW. Yeah, I know, kind of a mouthful, but trust me, it's super interesting.
Yeah.
And then lastly, we're going to connect all of this to the free energy principle, which is this like fundamental theory about how all biological systems work.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is how these three sources all kind of point to the same idea that the brain is essentially like this prediction machine. It's constantly trying to anticipate what's going to happen next, and then it updates its models based on experience. And as we'll see, this has some pretty profound implications for how we think about consciousness.
Okay, so let's start with this BrainLM thing. You said that it's a deep learning model that's trained on a ton of brain scan data.
Oh yeah, tons.
How much are we talking about?
We're talking over 6,700 hours of fMRI recordings. To put that in perspective, it would be like watching the entire extended editions of the Lord of the Rings movies back to back for over 6 months.
Whoa.
But instead of hobbits, BrainLM is watching brain activity unfold.
Okay, so it's like watching movies of the brain, basically. That's pretty wild. But what
Wow.
can it actually do with all that information?
Well, the results are really remarkable. BrainLM can actually predict future brain states based on past activity. And it can even forecast things like anxiety levels and potential PTSD symptoms.
So it's like BrainLM can peek into our brains and see what's coming next, emotionally speaking. That's both amazing and kind of creepy, don't you think?
Yeah, it definitely raises some interesting questions about free will and determinism, stuff that we'll get into a bit later. But I think the main takeaway for now is that BrainLM's predictive power really highlights this fundamental drive that brains have to anticipate and minimize surprise. Which brings us to the free energy principle.
Okay, let's unpack that free energy principle thing a bit. What's the basic idea?
Sure. So the free energy principle, it was developed by this neuroscientist, Karl Friston, and it proposes that all biological systems, from single cells to entire organisms, strive to minimize surprise in order to maintain stability and adapt to their environment. And they do this by constantly making predictions about the world based on their internal models.
So it's like our brains are always running these simulations, trying to figure out what's going to happen next based on what we've experienced before.
Yeah, exactly. And when those predictions don't match up with reality, when there's a prediction error, that's when we experience surprise. Like when you reach for your coffee cup and it's empty. That jolt of surprise, that's your brain realizing that its prediction was wrong.
Oh man, I know that feeling all too well. But how does this minimizing surprise actually work? Like, what's going on in our brains?
Okay, so minimizing free energy, which is basically the same as minimizing surprise, it involves two main processes: action and perception. Action is about changing our sensory input by interacting with the world, like filling up that empty coffee cup. And perception is about updating our internal models to better predict the world. So, next time we remember to check if the cup is empty before we reach for it.
So it's this constant back and forth between our actions, our perceptions, and our predictions, all working together to minimize surprise and keep us in sync with the world.
Right.
That's fascinating. But where does consciousness fit into all of this? Like, how do we go from predicting the future to actually experiencing the world?
Well, that's where the Embodied Predictive Global Workspace framework, or EPGW, comes into play.
Okay, I got to admit, that name is kind of intimidating. Can you break it down for us?
Sure. So to really get EPGW, it helps to understand a bit about global workspace theory. This theory basically suggests that consciousness arises when information becomes globally available in the brain, kind of like a news flash that's broadcast to all the different brain regions. EPGW builds on this idea by emphasizing the crucial role that the body plays in shaping conscious experience. So it's not just our brains making predictions, our bodies are actively involved through our embodied interactions with the world.
So it's not just our brains sitting there passively receiving information. Our bodies are actively shaping how we experience the world and making predictions based on that experience.
Yeah, exactly. Think about walking down a street you know really well. You're not consciously thinking about every single step you take, right? Your body's just predicting the terrain and adjusting your movements without you even having to think about it. But if you trip on something, like an uneven paving stone, that unexpected event, that prediction error, suddenly grabs your attention and becomes the focus of your conscious experience.
It's like our brains are saying, whoa, hold up, something's not right here.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And these prediction errors, these moments of surprise, they're actually super important for driving learning and updating our internal models of the world.
This is already making me rethink how I see the world.
Yes.
It's not just this passive stream of information. It's this active process of prediction, interaction, and constant adjustment.
Right.
So then how does BrainLM actually help us understand all of this? Like, what can it reveal that we couldn't see before?
Well, one of the really remarkable things about BrainLM is its ability to do something called zero-shot inference of functional brain networks. It's kind of a mouthful, but imagine, a detective solving a case based on clues without knowing who the culprit is beforehand.
Huh.
BrainLM can do something similar with the brain.
So BrainLM is like a detective for the brain.
Yeah. It can uncover these hidden networks and connections within the brain that give rise to, all these complex functions and behaviors without needing explicit labels or instructions. Yeah. This gives us a whole new way to understand how the brain is organized and how it generates predictions.
That's amazing. It's like we're getting a glimpse into the brain's internal communication system. But how does this connect back to the free energy principle and EPGW? How do they all fit together?
Well, remember how we talked about the brain minimizing surprise?
Yeah.
BrainLM's ability to predict future brain states actually provides real concrete evidence for that idea. It shows that the brain really is constantly anticipating and generating models of the world. And EPGW provides this framework for understanding how those predictions combined with our bodily interactions give rise to conscious experience.
So it's like BrainLM is providing the data, the hard evidence for what the free energy principle and EPGW are proposing theoretically.
Yeah.
That's really cool. It's a great example of how these different approaches can work together, to give us a deeper understanding of the brain.
Yeah, it is.
But before we move on, I have to ask, if our brains are constantly predicting the future, does that mean our choices are predetermined? Is free will just an illusion?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? It's complicated, and I don't think there's an easy answer. What do you think?
Well, it's a lot to think about, for sure. I guess we'll have to save that discussion for another time.
Sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive into the predictive brain, and all that. Last time we were talking about free will and, whether it even exists if our brains are always anticipating the future. It's a big question for sure, and one that I think we'll circle back to a bit later. But first, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about, some of the real-world implications of all this stuff.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I'm especially interested in the potential impact on artificial intelligence. Could we build AI that's, less rigid and more adaptable by incorporating these principles of prediction and error correction?
That's a great question. And it's exactly the kind of revolutionary thinking that, BrainLM and EPGW inspire. Imagine if we could create AI systems that aren't just programmed to follow instructions, but can actually learn and adapt the way we do, constantly refining their models of the world, based on prediction errors. We could move from AI that just breaks down when it encounters something unexpected to systems that can truly, roll with the punches.
Yeah, that sounds pretty sci-fi, to be honest. But if we could actually make that happen, the possibilities would be incredible. If we could have robots that move and interact with the world in a more natural, human-like way, maybe even robots that can anticipate our needs and work with us seamlessly.
Exactly. And think about the applications for things like assistive robots for people with disabilities or robots that could work in dangerous environments. These robots need to be more than just pre-programmed machines. They need some degree of embodied cognition, that ability to learn and adapt through interaction just like humans do. And that's where these insights from BrainLM and EPGW could be absolutely game-changing.
So it's not just about building smarter robots. It's about building robots that can understand and respond to the world in a way that's more human. But what about applications beyond robotics? What other fields could benefit from all of this?
Tons. Like neurorehabilitation, for example, helping people recover from brain injuries or strokes. Imagine using BrainLM's predictive power to create personalized treatment plans. We could simulate how different therapies might affect a person's brain, see which approaches would be most effective, and even predict potential challenges that might come up.
So instead of using a one-size-fits-all approach to treatment, we could actually tailor it to each person's unique brain and needs.
That's amazing. But it also makes me think about some of the ethical questions, like who would have access to this information and how would it be used?
Those are all really important questions and ones that we need to think carefully about as we develop these technologies.
Yeah.
But just focusing on the potential benefits for a moment, imagine being able to track the brain's healing process in real time, seeing how the neural pathways are rewiring themselves and being able to adjust treatment as needed. It's a level of precision and personalization that we've never had before.
It's like having this window into the brain's recovery process.
Yeah.
And that could guide therapists to, the best possible outcome. But what about the impact on education? If we can understand how the brain predicts and learns, couldn't we design better educational tools that are more engaging and effective? Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest challenges in education is figuring out how to meet the needs of each individual student. Everyone learns a little differently, but imagine educational software that can detect when a student is struggling or when they're getting bored and can then automatically adjust the difficulty or the pacing of the material. It would be like having a personal tutor who can anticipate your needs and provide customized support in real time.
That would be a game changer, especially for students who learn differently and maybe don't do so well in a traditional classroom setting. By tapping into the brain's natural prediction mechanisms, we could make learning more intuitive, more personalized, and ultimately more meaningful for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. It's about understanding how the brain is wired to learn and then designing educational experiences that really leverage those innate capabilities. And who knows, maybe someday we'll even be able to use tools like BrainLM to, predict a student's learning trajectory and identify their strengths and weaknesses before they even start school.
Wow, that's both exciting and kind of scary. But it really shows the power of bringing together all these different fields: neuroscience, computer science, education. It's amazing what we can accomplish when we work together.
I completely agree. And it all starts with that basic curiosity about how our brains work. We started with this deep dive into consciousness and prediction, and now we're talking about revolutionizing entire fields like healthcare and education. But we're not done yet. There are still so many questions to explore, so many possibilities to uncover.
Speaking of questions, what about that question of free will? If BrainLM can predict our future brain states and our behavior with such accuracy, does that mean that we're all just puppets on a string? Are our choices really just predetermined by our neural networks?
It's a question that people have been asking for centuries, and BrainLM definitely adds another layer to the debate. But before we jump to any conclusions, it's important to remember that BrainLM is just a model. It's a simplified representation of a much more complex system. And the human brain is incredibly dynamic, constantly interacting with the world in ways that are hard to predict with 100% certainty.
So you're saying there's still room for nuance?
Yeah.
For things to happen that we don't expect and that could influence our choices.
Exactly. And we can't forget about the power of consciousness itself. Even if our brains are generating all these predictions below the surface, we still have the ability to reflect on those predictions, to weigh different options, and to ultimately make a choice. Whether that choice is completely free from deterministic influences is a whole other debate. But I personally believe that consciousness plays an active role in shaping our actions, even if it's this complex interplay between prediction and conscious deliberation.
Well, that's a little reassuring. It'd be kind of a bummer to think that we're all just robots running on autopilot. But how do you think BrainLM and these theories about the predictive brain will evolve in the future? Where do we go from here?
Well, one really exciting area is the integration of multiple data sources. Imagine combining fMRI data with EEG, MEG, even genetic information. We could create these super rich and nuanced models of brain activity. It would be like putting together a multidimensional puzzle, revealing the brain's full complexity in ways that we never thought possible.
So instead of just looking at one snapshot of brain activity, we would create these dynamic, multifaceted models that capture the brain in action.
Exactly.
And with that kind of detailed information, the possibilities for understanding and even influencing the brain become almost limitless.
Exactly. Imagine personalized medicine that's tailored to a person's unique brain chemistry and genetic predispositions or brain-computer interfaces that can restore lost function and even enhance human capabilities, or AI systems that can actually understand and respond to human emotions. The possibilities are really mind-boggling.
It's a future that's full of promise, but also, potential challenges. As we gain more understanding of the brain and how it works, we also need to be really careful about the ethical implications. But I think we're just scratching the surface when it comes to unlocking the secrets of the human mind. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. The journey of understanding the brain is definitely not over, and with every new discovery we make, it seems like even more questions pop up, but that's what makes it so fascinating. It's this never-ending quest for knowledge and understanding, a constant exploration of what it means to be human, and I can't wait to see what we discover next.
Okay, so welcome back to our deep dive into the predictive brain. We've been talking about BrainLM, the free energy principle, and
Yeah.
EPGW, all this stuff about how our brains are always trying to predict the world
Yeah.
and how those predictions actually shape our reality.
Right.
But now I kind of want to step back a bit and ask, what does it all mean? What does it tell us about what it means to be human?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, we've been talking about the brain as this prediction machine and the role the body plays in shaping our perceptions, this whole dance between action and perception and prediction.
Yeah.
But how does all of that come together to create that feeling of me, like the sense of self we all have?
Right. It's like, how do we go from all these predictions to that feeling of I'm experiencing this is me, this is my life?
Yeah, it really is a huge mystery and one that I think we're really only starting to figure out. But the idea that our brains are always generating these models of the world predicting what's going to happen next, it really challenges a lot of the traditional ideas about free will and conscious control. It makes you wonder how much of our experience is actually spontaneous versus how much is shaped by these unconscious predictions.
Yeah, I gotta admit, that's kind of freaky to think about. What if all my choices are actually influenced by these things I'm not even aware of? I mean, it makes you think about all sorts of things like responsibility, morality, even what it means to have an identity.
Yeah, and those are questions that philosophers have been wrestling with for as long as we've been around. And now with neuroscience, we have all these new tools to explore those questions in a whole new light. But I think even if our choices are being shaped by these predictive processes, underneath it all, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're just automatons. We're not just blindly acting out some pre-programmed script.
So there's still room for agency, for us to actually think things through and make decisions, even if our brains are always predicting stuff in the background.
Exactly. Think about it like this. Our brains are creating these predictions based on our past experiences, our values, our beliefs, everything that makes us who we are. So in a way, our choices are still a reflection of ourselves, even if they're influenced by these unconscious processes.
I like that. It's kind of like our brains are giving us this menu of options, based on what we've learned and how we see the world. And then our consciousness steps in to weigh those options, think about what might happen, and then make the final call.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It really highlights the back and forth between prediction and conscious awareness, how they work together to guide our actions and shape our lives. And it's important to remember that our brains are incredibly adaptable. We're always learning, updating our models, refining our predictions based on new stuff we encounter.
So it's not like we're just stuck with whatever predictions our brain throws at us.
No, not at all.
We can change our minds, learn from our mistakes.
Yeah.
We can even surprise ourselves.
Of course. And that's really what makes being human so interesting. We're not just passively taking in information. We're actively shaping our reality, interacting with the world, and then changing how we understand it based on those interactions.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's almost like our brains are always running these experiments, trying out different predictions and seeing what happens.
Yeah.
And through all of that, we learn and we grow. We become who we are.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing system when you think about it. And the more we learn about these predictive processes, the more we can appreciate just how complex and how incredible the human mind really is.
I know, it's humbling. It makes you realize how much is happening in our brains that we're not even aware of. But it's also pretty empowering. Knowing that we have the ability to change how our minds work. We can shape our own destinies.
And that brings us to a really important point. Understanding all of this stuff isn't just about being curious.
Yeah.
It's about using this knowledge to make our lives better and to make the world a better place.
Yeah, exactly. We talked about some of the potential applications in things like artificial intelligence, helping people with brain injuries, even just making education better and more effective.
Right.
And I bet as we keep learning more about the predictive brain, all sorts of new possibilities will open up.
Yeah, for sure. Imagine a world where we could use this knowledge to treat mental health disorders better or create learning environments that are truly personalized,
Hmm.
or even design AI that's so intuitive it feels like you're interacting with another human being.
Yeah. I mean, that's a future that's both incredibly exciting and maybe a little scary at the same time. But I think we can all agree on one thing.
Yeah,
We're only just beginning to uncover all the secrets of the human mind.
that's the truth. And it's a journey that I think is going to continue to challenge us, surprise us, and ultimately lead us to a deeper understanding of what it means to be human.
So to wrap things up, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from all this?
I think the most important message is that your brain is incredibly powerful. It can adapt and learn in ways that are truly remarkable. And it's constantly making these predictions, learning from its mistakes, and shaping your experience of the world. And by understanding these processes, you can really appreciate just how amazing your own mind is.
Yeah, and maybe even figure out ways to use that knowledge to live a better life.
Exactly.
So to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never lose that sense of wonder about the power of your own mind. And until next time, keep diving deep.